Lamed Zayin Pasuk Hey. This is where Yosef begins dreaming and sharing his dreams with his brothers. And evidently it's clear Yosef understands that these dreams are just not delusions of grandeur, but rather they're prophetic dreams. I just want to bring out one point over here. In Pasuk Beis, the Pasuk says, "Vunar is b'nei bilo, is b'nei zilpo." So if you take a look in Rashi, Nar means he behaved like a youth. There was a certain degree of immaturity, as you would say, but as a youth focuses on certain things, on his appearance, he also focused on that. Yosef being the most beautiful human being who ever lived. He had a beauty which, one of a kind, and he appreciated his beauty. Like his mother was the most beautiful woman who ever lived, one of the most beautiful women who ever lived. He inherited that beauty. And Rashi says, what does it mean? Hunar? Shaya osa masa narus. He did actions which normally youth would do. Misakin saro. He would perfect, he would beautify his hair. He'd set his hair in place to actuate the beauty. Memashish beinov. And he would actually do things to his eyes, whether it was his lashes, his eyebrows, that he should appear beautiful, that people should appreciate his beauty. This is Yosef. Yosef is Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef is the most special child of Yaakov. Yisrael loved him more than all his other children, and we spoke about the appellation of Yisrael versus the appellation of Yaakov. Because Yaakov saw him as a successor, and he saw the spiritual capacity of Yosef, which the brothers did not have. And yet, Yosef is focusing on his hair, his eyes, to beautify them, that people should appreciate his beauty. What is this all about? What's the value of this beauty? Emphasizing and perfecting it, that it should be appreciated. We had mentioned that the Gemara tells us that Ein Zaro Shel Esav Nofel Yad Zaro Shel Rochel. We mentioned this yesterday, that the progeny of Esav could only be conquered and subdued and subordinated through the children of Rachel. So it's not Yosef had an ability. So when we quoted the Pasuk, when Yosef was born, Pasuk in Ovadia, which we had just read in this past week's Parsha, Haftorah, Beis Yaakov is Eish, Beis Yosef Lahova, and Esav is Kash. Esav is compared to the straw. As we said, Yaakov is fire, but fire cannot reach out to consume the straw. You need the flame. Yosef was the flame, and therefore when Yosef was born, after Yaakov being in the home of Lavan for 14 years, he was ready to leave, because he felt he had nothing to be concerned. Once Yosef is born, Yosef will be able to consume. So it means Yosef consumed doesn't mean he physically would go to war or battle, but that he exists, and he's part of Yaakov's family. Yaakov now has a level of representation that will consume Esav. This is when he's born initially. He's already, Beis Yosef is Lahova. He's a flame. In what way is he a flame? Just as being in existence, being born into existence and being part of Yaakov's family, his children, he's already that flame. Now as an adult, he is that flame, and he keeps stoking the flame and igniting it, that it should be visually seen, that flame. What exactly is that flame? And Rachel is that flame. It's the same thing. He inherited this characteristic of Lahava from his mother. So we'd explained that Rachel being the most beautiful woman, one of the most beautiful women ever lived. But in terms of who was she? She was the primary matriarch of Yaakov. She was his true zivug, his true soulmate. That's who Rachel was. And despite her physicality and all that you could speak about her in the physical sense, she was at the most advanced level, most perfect level, physically speaking. And she took that physicality, which normally a person would be drawn after it and be inclined to be consumed by it. She went and she subordinated it and she dedicated it fully to serve Hashem. She was the matriarch, the primary matriarch of the most special of the patriarchs, because Yaakov was the choicest of the patriarchs, and she was his soulmate. So therefore, she being at this perfect level of physicality, beauty in every sense of the word, she went and dedicated it totally to what Yaakov was all about. Esav, on the other hand, was the antithesis of this. He was the epitome of physicality, power, strength, amassing tremendous amounts of wealth, conquering, and he was subsumed by his own physicality. That drove him. That consumed him. As much as we say, Titin Emes Yaakov, Yaakov represents Emes, because Torah itself is the signet of Hashem, which is truth. Esav was guile at the most exaggerated level of deception, that it was almost impossible to detect who Esav was. He was so corrupted in this aspect, literally the antithesis, because that is material exaggerated, and that's really the chet of Adam Rishon, the snake, the ancient serpent, who actually caused Adam to ingest the fruit that contained Ra in the most lethal form. Esav epitomized that Ra, that evil. Amalek was an extension of that. So therefore, since Rachel was a woman who was able to subordinate and control and negate the material, therefore, Therefore, Esav's descendants fall into the hands of the children of Rachel for that reason. Yosef himself, being that physical person, you'd say, he himself is controlled by his physicality. Who is able to resist his own level of beauty, which is one of a kind, and his level of genius, which is one of a kind. And yet we find when he was viceroy of Egypt, the women all gazed at him. He's aleoyin. He's above the eye. He's not susceptible for the evil eye, because when the women would look at him, and he had every available woman, he did not lift up his eyes, did not look at them. When he was nearly seduced by the wife of Potiphar, it says, for everything that he resisted, he merited another level of kingship in terms of being viceroy of Egypt. His mouth, his neck, his body was not associated with her. For all those levels of resistance, because he had that control, he merited greatness and control and power in Egypt. And therefore he was the most powerful person in the world, Yosef. And he was the sustainer. And wherever he went, he rose above the physicality. He was in a leadership position with his brothers. He sold into slavery. He immediately controls all the financial affairs of his master. He goes to prison. He's imprisoned. He becomes the equivalent of the warden. He enters into the service of Paro. He becomes the viceroy. There's never a moment that he doesn't dominate the physical. That's Yosef. Because that is the characteristic of Rachel. So at this point, when he's 17 years old, and Hunar, he's not behaving immaturely. It's not immaturity at this point. But he's focusing on his physical appearance, his hair, his eyes, that people should see he is the the epitome of beauty. Because despite his epitome of beauty, but what does he represent? He's Ben Zukunim. He reflects the feature of his father, which is Kedusha. So what is the value of even the most advanced level of material physicality? Its value is to dedicate it to what? And consecrate it to Hashem. So when it says Vunar, and it says he's Mesakin Saro, he's beautifying his hair, his eyes, all that. I mean, seemingly Yaakov should have somehow given him direction, maybe to tone it a little bit, tone it down. No, because this is a representation of Rachel Imenu, what she was for that reason. And therefore you find, just the punchline, which I always say, the Greeks, the Medrash on the very beginning of the Torah, it says, V'choshech al pnei sahom. There was darkness over the deep waters. Choshech ze Yovan. Choshech is Yovan, are the Greeks, the Greek exile. Shechoshchu eineim shel Yisrael b'gzeirosam. They blackened the eyes of the Jews with their decrees. They have all kinds of decrees. We weren't permitted to circumcise ourselves. We weren't permitted to keep Shabbos. We weren't permitted to keep Torah. And we weren't permitted to sanctify the new moon. But in addition, what they had said was, you should take the horn of the ox and you should write on the horn, Ein lanu chelek b'elokei Yisrael. We have no share in the God of Israel. They said specifically, not on a wooden plaque, but on the horn of an ox. Now, who's the ox? B'chor shor hodolo. When Moshe Rabbeinu blessed the Shvotim before he passed away, what did he say about Yosef? B'chor shor hodolo. The shor, it's hodo, he has the beauty. Karni reim karnov. That he has the power of a shor of an ox, but the antlers are the antlers of the reim, which is the most majestic animal, the reim. So what the shor represents is Yosef. What's Yosef? Yosef is beauty, not for the sake of beauty. It's beauty which is only a means to sanctify God's name, to indicate and to display to the world that every value, even of the most perfect material, its value is only a means, not an end. However, what were the Greeks? The Greeks, their philosophy was beauty. They worship beauty. As a result of that, they said, take that horn of the ox and write on it, we have no share in the God of Israel. That's darkening. They wanted to totally blot it out, that this whole concept of the material is only means, not an end. It should be actually snuffed out, and it should not exist whatsoever.